March 15th, 2020, 3:47 a.m. A cheap smartphone vibrates on a bedside table in a quiet street in Swindon, England. Outside, the town is dead still. No traffic, no voices, just the hum of streetlights and the soft hiss of distant rain. Inside the bedroom, the glow of the screen cuts through the dark. One message, 11 words. They know. Run now, but it's too late. On any other night, that text might have saved a life, or at least an empire. But on this night, those 11 words arrive just a little too late. Because, as that phone buzzes, armed officers in black tactical gear are already in position. Vans sit around the corner with engines off and lights dead. In the back gardens and alleyways, figures in helmets and balaclavas move in silence, closing a net that's taken 4 long years to weave. Upstairs, oblivious to all of it, lies Warren Allison. He's sleeping on top of a mattress that hides £300,000 in cash beneath it. Bundles of dirty money pressed flat like a second secret bed. In 6 hours and 23 minutes, his wife will be crying in a police station, struggling to process how the man she thought she knew was actually living a double life. His bright green Lamborghini, the car he loved to rev just to turn heads, will be chained and tagged in a police impound yard. And detectives will be staring at evidence so twisted, so meticulously organized, that even seasoned officers will feel a chill. Because Warren wasn't just a drug dealer. He was the visible tip of something far more disturbing. He was the ringleader of an operation so advanced that investigators would describe it as a business with a corporate structure, but built on cocaine and fear. When police finally pulled it apart, they uncovered a conspiracy that had been quietly poisoning communities for 4 years. At least 70 kilograms of high-purity cocaine had flowed through this network, worth around £7 million on the street, enough to potentially kill 35,000 people if it all reached users in its pure form. And this wasn't some local gang selling wraps from a council estate stairwell. The Allison network had tentacles stretching from sleepy Wiltshire villages to the docks of mainland Europe and into the orbit of Albanian organized crime, the kind of syndicates linked to contract killings, violent debt enforcement, and death squads that don't issue second warnings. On paper, this was just another operation targeting drugs. In reality, it was a rare glimpse into how modern organized crime hides behind ordinary houses and normal jobs. Here's the most terrifying part. If that phone had buzzed just 30 minutes earlier, Warren could have grabbed the cash, burned the phones, wiped the drives, and vanished. The raids might have found nothing. The messages might have stayed hidden, and one of the most sophisticated drug networks in southern England might still be operating today, invisible and untouchable. What you're about to hear isn't just a crime story. It will make you question how well you really know your neighbors, your friends, even the people you pass every day in the supermarket. Because from the outside, Warren was just another guy with a taste for fast cars. On the inside, he was running a silent empire. To understand how it all began, how 2 brothers from Wiltshire ended up in bed with international traffickers and encrypted phones, we need to go back to 2016, to rolling green hills, quiet market towns, and the perfect place to hide a cocaine empire in plain sight. Wiltshire, 2016. On postcards, it's all rolling green hills, stone cottages, and sleepy market towns where the loudest drama of the week is a parking dispute or a missing garden gnome. It's the kind of place people move to when they've had enough of city chaos and want somewhere safe to raise kids. From the outside, Wiltshire looks allergic to serious crime, and maybe that's exactly why it was the perfect place for a cocaine empire to grow. At the center of it stood one man, Warren Allison, 32 years old. To most people, he was just another bloke from Swindon who liked nice cars and seemed to have more money than sense. But Warren had no interest in a normal life. While his neighbors got up for their 9-to-5 jobs, packed lunches, and commute traffic, Warren watched from the sidelines, quietly promising himself he'd never end up like them. He wasn't going to be the guy clocking in and out. He was going to be the guy nobody could tell what to do. Warren loved flash. Designer clothes, fast cars, nights out that bled into early mornings. But underneath that bravado there was something else. Calculation. He understood one thing very clearly. Small-time dealing was for idiots who wanted quick money and quick arrests. If he was going to risk his freedom, it had to be for serious money. Big league money. That's where his older brother came in. Kelroy Allison, 5 years older, living in the nearby village of Hilperton, was nothing like Warren on the surface. Where Warren wanted to be seen, Kelroy was comfortable disappearing into the background. He was quiet, methodical, the kind of man who double-checks a locked door and keeps notebooks filled with neat, tiny handwriting. If Warren was the face of the operation, Kelroy would become its brain. Together, they formed an unexpectedly perfect partnership. Warren had the contacts, the charisma, and the appetite for risk. Kelroy had the patience to build a system. Most criminals start small. A few grams here, a few ounces there, learning on the job. Warren and Kelroy didn't bother with that apprenticeship. They went straight for the top. Their sights locked onto something far more dangerous than local suppliers. Albanian organized crime syndicates. These weren't random street dealers. These were people plugged into a network that had spent years moving cocaine from South America into Europe. Shipments left ports in South America, crossed the Atlantic, slipped into European ports like Antwerp and Rotterdam, then were quietly sliced and distributed through cities like London, Birmingham, and Manchester. Somehow, through a web of introductions and criminal contacts, Warren and Kelroy managed to plug themselves into this pipeline. Their Albanian connections could supply bulk quantities. Not grams, not ounces, but kilograms. 10, 20, even 30 kilos at a time. Pure, uncut cocaine, the kind that hadn't been stomped on and diluted yet. For the Albanians, the Allison brothers were valuable regional partners. Ambitious, capable, and operating in an area that didn't yet have a dominant, sophisticated supplier. For Warren and Kelroy, this was the moment everything changed. They weren't just middlemen anymore. They were about to build one of the most advanced drug trafficking networks southern England had ever seen, a network that would blend high-level organization with ruthless efficiency. And every step they took from here on out would put them on a collision course with one of the most determined police investigations Wiltshire had ever run. Here's the twist. If you think you know how these stories usually go, sloppy mistakes, obvious patterns, careless bragging, this isn't that. The Allison brothers didn't rely on luck. They built a machine, a system so carefully designed that, for years, police could sense something was wrong but couldn't quite see it. What they created next turned them from ambitious criminals into ghosts. It involved military-grade encrypted phones, code words, specially modified vehicles, and a team of trusted associates who looked completely ordinary. On paper, they were drivers, girlfriends, cousins, neighbors. In reality, they were cogs in a multi-million-pound cocaine operation. And once that machine was running, shutting it down would take 4 relentless years of detective work. By 2017, the machine was humming. The Allison brothers had moved past the fumbling early days and into something that looked disturbingly like a proper business model. Only instead of stock and invoices, their world revolved around kilos and cash. At the heart of it were their Albanian suppliers. 2 names would later echo through case files and courtroom transcripts: Leonhar and Patricia, both Albanian nationals operating quietly in the UK. To the outside world, they were ghosts. No flashy lifestyles, no loud presence on social media. But for Warren and Kelroy, they were the direct tap into bulk cocaine. And this wasn't petty, street-level volume. Leon and Patricia arranged shipments of 10, 20, sometimes even 30 kilograms at a time. Pure, uncut cocaine, arriving in the UK worth hundreds of thousands of pounds before anyone even touched it. With that kind of product on hand, the next challenge was staying invisible. The brothers knew the golden rule of modern organized crime. Communication gets you caught. One intercepted phone call, one stupid text, one careless brag in the wrong chat, and the entire operation could come crashing down. So they didn't rely on normal phones or casual WhatsApp groups. They decided to buy invisibility. They invested in military-grade encrypted communication systems. EncroChat, Sky ECC. If you haven't heard of them, that's the point. These weren't apps you downloaded from a normal app store. These were stripped down, modified devices built specifically for criminals. No cameras, no normal messaging apps, no social media. Just encrypted messaging that routed through servers designed to erase, conceal, and obscure messages that were marketed as impossible to crack, impossible to trace. On these devices, Warren and Kelroy weren't Warren and Kelroy. They were code names, handles. Behind those aliases, their conversations were about designer clothes, packages, and meetings. On the surface, it sounded like fashion imports and business deals. In reality, jackets meant kilos, fittings meant deliveries, and clients were dealers across southern England. This wasn't random slang. It was a carefully constructed language meant to fool anyone listening in. But encrypted chats alone wouldn't move cocaine across counties. They needed someone who could physically transport drugs and cash without drawing attention. Enter Richard Cowell. Richard was 57, living in Freshbrook, Swindon. To his neighbors, he probably seemed almost boring. Another middle-aged man with a car and a routine. But Richard had a particular set of skills. He was a driver. More specifically, he was a courier for organized crime. The Allison brothers equipped him with something extraordinary, a specially modified vehicle. This wasn't just a car with a loose panel. It had purpose-built hidden compartments, engineered to evade detection, hollow spaces behind factory panels, concealed cavities, triggered by specific sequences or hidden switches. Richard would drive through Wiltshire, past police cars, through routine traffic stops, with kilograms of cocaine or stacks of cash hidden just inches away from officers who had no idea. Cash went one way, drugs went the other, and the car itself became the bloodstream of the operation. During his eventual confession, Richard admitted something that stunned investigators. He hadn't just been working for the Allisons. He'd couriered for multiple crime groups. He was, in effect, an on-call Uber driver for organized crime, quietly moving poison and profit from one shadowy hand to another. Still, even the smoothest criminal enterprise needs someone to tame the chaos of money. That's where love and crime collided. Portia Denley, 38, from Melksham, wasn't just Warren's girlfriend. She was his finance manager, his money launderer, his most trusted lieutenant, while Warren played the part of the flashy crime boss, revving engines, buying watches, posting the lifestyle. Portia was the one taking care of the unglamorous side. She collected cash from dealers, moved money between accounts, funneled it through fronts and schemes designed to scrub away its criminal smell. Her job was to turn millions of pounds in cocaine profits into assets that looked clean. And those assets? They were unmissable. The Lamborghini Huracan, the Mercedes C63 AMG, the Audi RS6. High-performance cars worth more than most people's houses, paid for in cash, no questions asked. What Warren didn't fully grasp was that every key turn of those engines, every brag-worthy purchase, every unexplained cash deal wasn't just a reward, it was a breadcrumb. And somewhere out there, detectives were starting to follow the trail. By 2019, the Allison operation wasn't just a Wiltshire problem anymore. What had started in quiet Swindon streets and sleepy villages had seeped outward, slipping into bigger cities where the profits grew and the risks multiplied. The machine the brothers had built was no longer local, it was regional. Their network now reached into Bristol, a city with a thriving nightlife and constant demand for cocaine. To handle that market, Warren and Kelroy turned to family. Anthony Burke, their cousin, became the Bristol connection. He wasn't just shifting a few ounces at parties. Anthony was overseeing major deliveries into the city, handling loads worth £300,000 to £400,000 at a time. These weren't casual drops. They were carefully scheduled, tightly controlled transactions feeding an entire layer of dealers. On the surface, everything still looked under control. The encrypted phones were working. The couriers were moving product. The cash was being washed. Warren was still buying toys. But what the brothers didn't realize was that the ripples of their success were starting to show up on someone else's radar. Detective Constable Matthew Harvey, part of Wiltshire Police's Serious and Organized Crime Unit, had been watching the region's drug landscape shift. Cocaine seizures were up. There were signs that purity on the street had increased, a telltale mark that someone higher up the chain was pushing unusually clean product. Patterns across different towns started to align like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. Similar packaging, similar phone behavior, similar names whispered by confidential sources. Harvey and his team knew something big was moving behind the scenes. Not a scattered group of small-time dealers, but a structured, disciplined supplier. The kind that doesn't advertise, doesn't fight over street corners, and doesn't appear in gossip, because they're smart enough to let others take the visible risks. Finding that source, however, was something else entirely. The Allison brothers had designed their network to be almost invisible. Layered roles, encrypted devices, cash couriers, no obvious stash houses with drugs piled in cupboards, no one standing on street corners with pockets full of wraps. So the investigation had to be just as sophisticated as the network. Months of surveillance began. Plainclothes officers sat in unmarked cars for hours, scribbling down plates, times, and routes. They followed vehicles across counties, mapped contacts, built timelines. Analysts waded through thousands of documents, phone records, financial statements, suspicious transactions. Telecoms data was pulled apart and reassembled, building a diagram of calls and messages that, at first, looked like noise. But every system leaves fingerprints. Every invisible criminal leaves traces. The breakthrough didn't come from some dramatic cinematic twist. It came from something incredibly ordinary. Community intelligence. Someone, somewhere, noticed that things didn't add up. Maybe it was Warren's sudden fleet of high-end cars parked outside an address that didn't match that kind of income. Maybe it was the constant traffic at odd hours. Maybe it was just a neighbor with a gut feeling that this wasn't right. Whatever the exact trigger, information was passed on. A call, a tip, a quiet conversation, and that was enough for Harvey's team to tighten the focus of their lens. They started cross-referencing suspicious addresses with unusual financial behavior, and with vehicles linked to known or suspected players. The Allison brothers thought they'd cloaked themselves in technology and coded language. In reality, they were leaving a trail that, when viewed from high enough, formed a clear picture. Every encrypted message, every cash handover, every luxury purchase was being quietly catalogued. The investigators didn't yet know every name or every role, but they could feel the shape of the network pressing through the data. And as the focus sharpened, one name kept surfacing in the Bristol side of the web: Anthony Burke. He was about to make a mistake. Not a loud, reckless one, just a moment where routine and confidence overlapped. The kind of misstep that separates criminals who walk away rich from those who end up in the dock. And while the British side of the operation drifted toward that crucial error, something equally dramatic was unfolding far beyond Wiltshire, in server rooms and operations centers across Europe, where law enforcement agencies were quietly preparing a move that would change the game for criminals everywhere. While Wiltshire detectives were piecing together the British side of the puzzle, another story was unfolding hundreds of miles away, one that the Allison brothers had no idea would decide their fate. Because while they were obsessed with staying one step ahead of local police, their Albanian suppliers were playing a much bigger, much more dangerous game. Leon Ha, 38, and his associate Patricia, 37, weren't street dealers chasing weekend money. They were senior operators in an international trafficking network that had spent years refining the art of moving cocaine from South America into Europe and then into the UK. For them, cocaine was just another commodity. They thought in bulk, shipping containers, multi-country routes, coded logistics. They had contacts in multiple nations, access to laundering channels, and a network of intermediaries who treated crime like a full-time corporate career. To them, men like Warren and Kelroy were regional partners, reliable distribution nodes in a profitable territory. If one node fell, another could be plugged in. But around late 2019, something started to feel wrong. Ha and Petisha noticed that some of their UK contacts had gone quiet. Communications took longer to come back. There were whispers about other networks being taken apart with unusual efficiency. There were rumors of law enforcement suddenly turning up with evidence they shouldn't have had, details that didn't fit the usual pattern of traditional wiretaps or lucky traffic stops. At their level, paranoia is a survival skill. So they did what experienced criminals do when they sense a storm coming. They prepared to run. The plan wasn't simple. They didn't want to just vanish. They wanted one last payday, one more major shipment, one more injection of cash to cushion their exit. To pull it off, they needed someone on the ground in the UK who could handle logistics if they faded into the background. Someone who could bridge their side of the operation with the British distributors and, crucially, manage the tools that kept everyone feeling untouchable. Enter Enid Aliko, 28. Based in the UK and wired into the Albanian criminal ecosystem, Enid wasn't a typical drug dealer. He wasn't standing on corners or handing over wraps in nightclub toilets. His job was purely about technology and trust. He became, essentially, the IT department for an international cocaine syndicate. Enid supplied encrypted devices, EncroChat and Sky ECC phones, to key players. He set them up, distributed them, and managed the flow of secure communications between Albanian suppliers and British distributors like the Allisons. He was the man you called when you needed a new secure handset, when you lost one, when the network had to go dark for a while. If drugs and money were the bloodstream, Enid handled the nervous system. But there was a flaw no one on the criminal side had accounted for. The very systems they believed were unbreakable had quietly become the biggest liability they'd ever had. In 2020, European law enforcement agencies pulled off something that would later be described as one of the most significant intelligence breakthroughs in modern policing. They cracked EncroChat. Overnight, the fortress doors opened. Millions of messages that criminals believed were safe. Messages about shipments, debts, threats, murder plots, money laundering poured into the hands of investigators across Europe. The Allison brothers didn't know it. Ha and Petisha didn't know it. Enid certainly didn't know it. They were still tapping out coded conversations on devices that might as well have been wired directly into police evidence servers. The very encryption they thought made them invisible was now turning their secrets into a searchable database. Even as the walls closed in, the network kept moving. Anthony Burke in Bristol was still receiving high-value shipments. Warren was still buying luxury cars with drug money. The Albanians were still trying to engineer one last big score before disappearing. What none of them realized was that the endgame had already begun. The police weren't guessing anymore. They were reading. And when the moment finally came for officers in Bristol to move on Anthony Burke and that seemingly innocuous Tesco bag for life, they weren't going in blind. They were executing the final act of a plan built on 4 years of legwork and thousands of messages criminals believed no one would ever see. March 2020, Bristol. Anthony Burke thinks it's just another day at work, another delivery, another bag, another few £100,000 worth of cocaine sliding quietly into a city that will swallow it without a trace. For him, this is routine now. He doesn't know that on this particular day, every movement he makes, every gear change, every glance over his shoulder is being watched and recorded. The operation has been months in the making. Plainclothes officers are already in position around the delivery point, parked in unremarkable cars, dressed in unremarkable clothes. Surveillance cameras are rolling. Radio chatter is low and clipped. This is the moment where 4 years of painstaking work will either pay off or vanish in a single mistake. Anthony is waiting for a delivery. The product is worth up to £400,000. High-purity cocaine that will be broken down, cut, and sold on through Bristol's streets for months. On EncroChat devices, messages have been exchanged, times confirmed, locations agreed. The criminals think they're communicating inside a steel vault. In reality, detectives have already read the script. A car pulls up. To anyone passing by, it's nothing. No screeching tires, no aggressive driving, just another vehicle easing into place. A man gets out. In his hand, a Tesco bag for life. The exact kind you'd use to carry milk, bread, and cereal home from the supermarket. It's ordinary to the point of invisibility, and that's exactly why traffickers love it. Nobody looks twice at a shopping bag. The handoff takes seconds. The bag moves from one pair of hands to another. Money is exchanged, casual, practiced. To the untrained eye, it's two people swapping shopping. To the officers watching, this is the moment. The signal goes out. Move. Suddenly, the calm scene fractures. Officers flood in from nowhere. Doors open, shouts cut through the air. Anthony doesn't have time to process what's happening before he's pinned, cuffed, and pulled away from the bag that was supposed to make him rich. The Tesco bag for life is seized and opened. Inside, multiple tightly wrapped packages of cocaine. Lab tests will later confirm what everyone already suspects. This is high-purity product, the kind that fuels entire local markets. This isn't just a good seizure. It's the key the investigators have been waiting for. Now they have physical drugs tied to specific people, times, and communications. They have messages. They have routes. They have a crystal-clear snapshot of the network in motion. And once they have that, there's no reason to wait. The synchronized raids begin almost immediately. At dawn, across Wiltshire, Bristol, and London, doors that had once seemed like the edges of quiet, respectable lives explode inward under the force of battering rams. Flashing lights cut through early morning darkness. Officers pour into hallways and bedrooms, shouting commands, securing suspects, seizing phones, laptops, notebooks, keys, and cash. In Swindon, the flashy ringleader finally meets the reality he's been outrunning. Warren Allison is arrested at his home. The same home where he slept above £300,000 in cash. The same home he treated as a base for his empire. In Hilperton, his brother and operational mastermind Kelroy is taken into custody. In Freshbrook, Richard Cowell, the quiet driver with the not-so-quiet hidden compartments, is pulled from the life he thought he could keep compartmentalized forever. In Melksham, Portia Denley, the woman who turned dirty money into clean assets, is arrested. In Bristol, Anthony Burke sits in a cell, replaying the moment the Tesco bag changed everything. Within hours, the UK side of the network is in pieces. Bank accounts are frozen, properties are searched, luxury cars, including Warren's beloved Lamborghini, are seized and hauled away on low loaders, trophies turned into evidence. But the operation doesn't stop at the Channel. Remember Har and Patricia? They thought they'd timed their escape perfectly, slipping out of the UK before the hammer fell. They were wrong. European arrest warrants are issued. Interpol is alerted. Financial assets linked to them across multiple countries are targeted and frozen. Bit by bit, their illusion of safety evaporates. Within months, both men are in custody abroad, fighting and losing battles against extradition back to the UK. And then there's Enid Alico, the tech specialist who believed he could stay in the shadows. Even after the main arrests, he tries to keep things going, still arranging devices, still attempting to breathe life back into a dying network. But the spell is broken. The same evidence that brought down the others leads officers straight to him. He too is arrested. The empire has fallen. But the story isn't over. Now all of these players, the brothers, the driver, the launderer, the cousin, the suppliers, the tech man, will have to step into the harshest light of all, a courtroom. And in that courtroom, they'll try one last desperate trick. A story so absurd it almost defies belief. When the dust settled on the raids, what was left wasn't just a pile of seized cocaine, impounded cars, and confiscated cash. What remained was something far more dangerous to the people who'd been running this empire. Paperwork, phone records, financial trails, surveillance logs, cracked encrypted messages. 4 years of their lives, preserved in forensic detail, ready to be laid out in front of a jury. The stage was set at Winchester Crown Court. For 12 weeks, the courtroom became the final arena for the Allison network. Jurors watched as thousands of pieces of evidence were presented. Intercepted EncroChat messages, surveillance footage of meetings and handovers, forensic reports on high-purity cocaine, bank records showing eye-watering spends on luxury cars and watches. The investigation that had started with whispers and odd patterns now spoke in hard, cold numbers. Faced with this mountain of evidence, you might think the defendants would plead guilty, take their sentences, and hope for mercy. Instead, they doubled down on arrogance. Warren Allison, his brother Kelroy, and courier Richard Cowell offered a defense so bizarre it left even seasoned court reporters shaking their heads. According to them, all those encrypted chats about product, deliveries, quality, and clients weren't about cocaine at all. They claimed they were dealing in fake designer clothes, counterfeit fashion, knockoff gear. The kilos weren't blocks of cocaine. They were supposedly boxes of bootleg jackets. The conversations about purity and weight, the huge sums of money changing hands, the modified courier vehicle, all, they insisted, part of an underground fashion business. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so insulting to everyone's intelligence. The prosecution took that story and shredded it. They showed the jury the contents of the Tesco bag for life, seized in Bristol, packages tested and confirmed as high-purity cocaine. They played surveillance footage of handovers that matched timestamps and messages from the encrypted devices. They walked the jury through bank statements showing purchases of supercars and expensive watches that no fake clothing sideline could ever realistically fund. They laid out the 70 kilograms of cocaine traced through the network, worth around £7 million on the street. It didn't take long. After 12 weeks of evidence, the jury took only hours to reach their decision. Guilty. On every major count. When sentencing day arrived, the courtroom felt different. This wasn't about doubt anymore. It was about consequences. Warren Allison, the self-styled kingpin with the Lamborghini and the illusion of invincibility, was handed 23 years in prison. His older brother and right-hand strategist, Kelroy, received 16.5 years. Richard Cowell, the courier who turned his car into a mobile vault, was sentenced to 9 years. Porsche Denley, the financial brain who turned drug money into apparent legitimacy, got 8 years. Anthony Burke, the Bristol connection whose Tesco bag delivery had opened the floodgates, also received 8 years. The Albanian suppliers who'd tried to run, Leonhar and Petisha, were brought back to the UK and sentenced to more than 7 years and more than 6 years respectively. Even the man in the shadows, tech specialist Enid Aliko, was jailed for 4 years for his role in keeping the network talking. In total, more than 82 years of prison time was handed down. One of the biggest organized crime cases Wiltshire had ever seen ended not with a glamorous escape, but with a series of long, locked doors. After sentencing, Detective Constable Matthew Harvey summed it up simply. These sentences showed that those involved in organized crime are not untouchable, not above the law. But there was a quieter truth behind his words. For 4 years, this network had operated almost invisibly. It moved 70 kilograms of cocaine through quiet towns and busy cities. It corrupted ordinary-looking people and linked them to international syndicates. And for most of that time, it worked. They were only caught because someone spoke up, because neighbors noticed luxury cars that didn't fit the postcode, because people saw unusual traffic at odd hours, because community intelligence crossed paths with determined detectives, and, together, they tugged at a thread until a whole empire came undone. Warren's Lamborghini is now just a seized asset, waiting to be auctioned. His untouchable empire is gone. He has more than 2 decades to think about how greed and arrogance turned encrypted phones and fast cars into prison bars. But the cocaine trade didn't end with the Allison brothers. Right now, in towns just as quiet, in streets just as ordinary, other networks are trying to copy their blueprint. They think they're smarter. They think they're safer. They think they're invisible. The question isn't whether they exist. It's whether they'll make the same mistakes. Forgetting that every crime leaves a trace. Every network has a weak link. And sometimes, the most powerful weapon against organized crime is a single person who decides that something just doesn't look right and picks up the phone.